Hello and welcome to another Every Tuesday tutorial. In this week's tutorial, we're going to be creating this kind of paper cut out layered letter look, which this look could be applied to a brand system. You could create web graphics off of it. You could put it inside of a logo instead of a letter like you see here. There's so many different possibilities for this technique, and it's super fun. This is a little bit more of an advanced tutorial, so I'm going to kind of breeze through things that I usually explain more in depth, but I have tutorials on all of those more technical aspects, and I'll leave links in the video description. So this is our final outcome, and we kind of have a couple of steps to get there. So just making these initial shapes, we're going to create those in Illustrator. You can definitely create everything you see here in Photoshop. I'm creating the shapes in Illustrator because I work way faster when I'm creating just organic shapes. And then we're going to bring them into Photoshop, and we're going to, let me actually show you. So this is what we're going to do in Illustrator. It looks like a blobby mess, but it's going to turn out really cool. So we're going to do this in Illustrator, then we're going to bring it into Photoshop, and we're going to make it look like this, which is super cool. And you can just use this as a background if you wanted. And then we're going to kind of mask it into a letter right here and add a little more cool shadow effects. So this is the final outcome. So we're going to go from here to here in this video. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of speeding the video up throughout this, so don't feel overwhelmed or intimidated. I'm going to walk you through everything, and let's just jump right in. So I'm going to create a brand new document. So I'm going to go File, New. I'm going to keep this RGB only because it'll keep all the colors way more vibrant for this tutorial, but if you wanted to print this, just make sure you change the color mode right here to CMYK instead. And I'm just going to keep this at 8.5 by 11 inches, portrait orientation, hit OK, got our document. So I'm going to paste in my color palette right here, and I'm just going to click on each one of these and I'll zoom in on the color build. So if you want to steal this color palette, have at it. So here is this bright teal, the darker blue, the bright kind of red orange. This is more of a pink, and then here's the yellow. Okay, so what I do is I just hit N on my keyboard for my pencil tool, and I'm just gonna draw a random like kind of hilly shape, and then just make sure they're connected. And then I'm gonna hit I on my keyboard and just eyedropper one of the colors. And then I'm gonna hit V on my keyboard for my selection tool, and then click anywhere, because you don't want this selected when you go to draw again, otherwise it's gonna think you're adding on to this drawing. And now you're gonna hit N one more time, and you're just gonna come up and just make sure you kind of have some variation where the hills kind of didn't go up before, make them go up on your next shape. Hit I, color drop, and then to send it to the back, I hit Command Shift open bracket, and that'll send it to the back. And I'm just gonna work my way up, and I'll speed up the video and draw out the rest of these. Okay, so now we have all of our shapes. It doesn't matter if you don't go all the way up. Just get a good solid block of different shapes just to add that variation. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna select your color palette and just delete it, because this part is kind of important. If you wanna keep your artwork right now, definitely save it as an Illustrator file, maybe before you delete that color palette. And then when you're ready, this is what you're gonna do. You're gonna select all of your shapes. You're gonna come over to your layers palette. You're gonna toggle this little options, little icon down, and then you're gonna choose Release to Layers Sequence. And what this will do is it'll put every single one of these shapes on its own layer. So when we export it as a Photoshop file, they all show up as their own layer. If you don't do this part, Photoshop, when you export it as a Photoshop file, it'll automatically group some of the shapes together, and we don't want that. We want them to all be separate. So this is the way to do that. So now that, and it doesn't even matter that they're not all named, we're totally fine the way we are right here. So now we're gonna export this as a Photoshop file. So you're just gonna go File, Export, and then choose where you wanna save it. And I'm just gonna call these shapes. And down here where it says Format, choose Photoshop PSD and hit Export. And then when this dialog box shows up, color model is totally fine at RGB. We want this to be 300. This is the most important part right here though. Right layers, make sure this little bullet is toggled on, and then you're just gonna hit OK. And after this is saved, it doesn't really take that long, you're just gonna come into Photoshop, and we're gonna go File, open, and we're going to open that file that we just created. Hit open, and here we go. So the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to create our full document size here, and that is image, canvas size, and we're going to change this to 8.5 by 11, and hit OK, and hit proceed. Okay, so this is the size of our regular 8.5 by 11 paper, and you can see the edges are kind of hanging off, which is important. We want that to happen because we don't want it to be weird on the edges. It looks way better if you kind of crop off the edges, and we can crop the bottom down here too. And now we are good to go with starting to add the shadows in. So this part is a pretty tedious part of the process, so put your favorite music on and just have at it. It's actually pretty peaceful and calming. I'm going to walk you through the process. I'm going to do 2 of these, and then from there I'm just going to time lapse the video again so it speeds everything along. So the first thing we're going to do is select this first layer right here, and if I toggle it on, toggle it off, you can see which one I have. The next thing I'm going to do is copy this layer, so Alt, click, and drag right below it, so now I've got 2 of the same thing. Next, I'm going to toggle right over the image preview in the layers palette right here, hold Command, and then just click, and that'll make a selection of it. You want to make sure your black is in the background right here. If it's not, you can toggle this, or you can or you can hit X on your keyboard and it'll switch them around. So just make sure black is right here, and then you're going to hit Command Delete or Control Backspace, and that will fill this in black, and you can see right here in the little image preview, and if I turn this one off, now it's black. Perfect. So now we're going to deselect this, Command D or Control D on a PC, and then we're going to select it, Command T or Control T on a PC, and that's our free transform. Then you're going to right click and choose Warp. So this is where this kind of faux shadow comes in, and all I'm going to do is click like right here and drag it a little bit, and you can see it's warping the shape, the actual shape, and kind of off centering it to the right. So as you can see, we've got these really nice organic shapes happening, and this is why we're not using just a drop shadow layer style. You may be wondering, that would be way faster if you just do a drop shadow. This creates that more organic feel and more real feel, because when you do a drop shadow, it's always evenly spaced off of every edge. So however high up it is here, it's going to be the same height here, and this creates that variation, which is really beautiful. So it is quite a bit more work, but it comes out more special looking and better than if you had just automated it with a drop shadow. So that's why we're doing it this way, which makes it way more creative of an outcome in the end. So I'm just off centering it just slightly, and then I'm going to hit enter or return to commit those changes, and now we're going to apply Gaussian blur. So just come up here and go filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and we're going to keep it at like 20%, which is what you see right here, and hit OK. I'm going to reduce the opacity of this to 50% and change the blend mode to multiply. So it'll blend really nicely with whatever colors or textures show up behind it. And then the last thing I'm going to do is you can kind of alternate. I like alternating, keeping just some flat color. And then you definitely don't have to do this, but I think it's a nice little added extra bonus, is adding a texture to it. So I like adding paper texture patterns, and I actually have 2 paper texture pattern packs. One's recycled paper textures, and then one is a handmade textures pack, and they come as patterns, so they're seamless. So if I double click on here, you can see if I choose pattern overlay and I toggle, you can see my watercolor ones right there, but if I toggle down, you can see these are all different paper texture patterns, and down here are the handmade ones. The ones up here are the recycled ones, so they're a little more subtle. So if I choose multiply right here, I'll link to these two if you want to check them out further. And if I just click around, you can see I've got some pretty cool effects happening, and it does feel like paper, which makes it that much cooler. So I like this one, so I'm just going to hit OK. And now what I do, just to keep everything super organized, because when we're creating all these new layers, it can kind of get out of hand in your layers palette. So I'm just going to hold Shift, click on the bottom layer, and then Command G or Control G on a PC to group these together. And now I don't have to worry about losing track of them. They're all grouped together. So I'm going to walk you through doing that same process for the next one, and we're actually going to do this for every single one of these shapes. So that's the tedious part, but the result result is pretty awesome and totally worth it in my opinion. Okay, so what we're gonna do is come to our next shape. We're gonna hold Alt, click, and drag right below it to make a copy. Hold Command or hold Control if you're on a PC, and then just click this little thumbnail. And then you're going to hit Command Delete or Control Backspace to fill it with black, because that will fill whatever this background color is, and we've defined it as black right here. Deselect, Command D or Control D on a PC, and now free transform, Command T or Control T on a PC, right click, warp, and then just grab and drag slightly over. Hit Enter or Return to commit those changes. Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I've got mine set at 20 pixels. Hit OK. Reduce the opacity down to 50%. Change the blend mode to multiply. And now we're just going to double click on the color layer, not on your shadow. Make sure it's the color one. Double click, pattern overlay, and now we're going to change the blend mode of the pattern overlay to multiply, and then choose whatever paper texture you want to put in there, or you can just leave it as flat color too. So definitely don't feel like you've got to do this, but I like kind of mixing it up a little bit. Let's see. That one might be too subtle. That one looks pretty good. So I'm going to hit OK, and then hold Shift, and then Command G or Control G on a PC to group them together. And now we're moving on to our next layer. Okay, so I don't like using Photoshop Actions for this. You may be wondering why I'm not doing this, because just moving it each time is more of a handmade feel. So I like keeping that actual human interaction with the artwork instead of just automating it all. So that's why I'm not using Photoshop Actions for that. So I'm going to speed the video along, and I'm going to get through all the rest of these shapes, and then I'll be right back after these are done. Okay, we've got all of our shapes with shadows and textures, most of them with textures. I did alternate here and there. So this one's a flat texture, or this one's just a flat one, and this one's flat color. This one over here is flat color, but you can see where the paper texture comes in, and it's looking pretty real and really cool. So now that we've got our main kind of background texture going on, this wave pattern, we're going to close up this group, and we're going to replicate it. So we always have our raw artwork in our folder. We don't want to do anything that would ruin all that time and effort that we just spent. So we're going to duplicate this folder just by holding Alt, click, and you can just drag down, and then you've got a copy. So I'm going to turn this one off because this is our reserve. We're not going to touch it anymore. So that one, just pretend it's not even there, but it's there in case we really royally mess up and we need to go back. We've got it. Okay, so for this one, we're actually going to merge the group. So right click and choose merge group. All right, now it's one flat big image. So this is perfect because now we can put it inside of our letter. So the next we're going to do is we're just going to set our background color to white just so we can see what we're doing. So I'm going to create a new layer and then just drag it to the bottom. Turn the white to your background color, and then hit Command Delete or Control Backspace on a PC to set that to white. And next we're going to create a new layer right above it. You can actually just hit T on your keyboard and it'll create a new layer right above it. And we're just going to type whatever letter you want to use. I'm going to use the letter T for Tuesday and Tila. Okay, so I'm going to make this super big so we can put all of our shapes inside of it. And I'm going to make this font, I'm going to use Evelith Clean Regular for mine, and I'll leave a link to that if you'd like to check it out. I can move this up on the top just to see what size I'm working with. I actually want to make this a little bit bigger. So that looks good. I'm just Command T and then holding Shift and grabbing a corner to enlarge it proportionally. Okay, so that looks good. So now I'm going to move my T at the bottom. I'm going to select my shapes, right click, create clipping mask, and that's going to mask it right into my T. So now I can actually move this around and figure out what looks best. I can even enlarge it slightly. Don't go too crazy because you don't want to ruin your resolution here, but you can increase it just a little bit if you feel like you will have a better placement if it's just a little bit bigger. And that feels pretty good. There's a lot of variation going on. I like that I've got some hills and valleys and even some like angles and planes. So there's a lot of different shape variation and texture going on here, and I've got some nice color happening. So all that looks really good. I do feel like I need to move this up so it's a little more centered. All right. Okay, so now that we have our T, we're going to do kind of an interesting workaround to make that same kind of organic shadow happen inside of the T. So we can't just use plain old layer styles with this because we are creating something that's a little more handmade looking. So what we're going to do is create a new layer. So select your texture so this new layer appears right above it, and just click your new layer icon, and then we're going to fill it with a pink color. So I'm going to eyedropper my pink, and then I'm going to hit X on my keyboard to make sure my pink is in the background, and then hit Command Delete or Control Backspace to fill this entire top layer with that pink. The next thing we're going to do is come over to this T, hold Command or Control on a PC, and then click once, and it'll make a selection of the T, and make sure you're on this pink layer or whatever color you made it, and then just hit delete. Okay, so the next thing we need to do, I'm going to deselect this by hitting Command D or Control D on a PC, and I'm going to replicate this layer because we need a black layer in order to create that shadow. This is just going to be the color of our document, kind of like you see right here. So what we're going to do is hold Alt, click, and drag to make a new T layer right here, and I'm going to change my background color to the black. Hold Command, click once on here to select, and then Command Delete or Control Backspace to make this black, and then Command D or Control D to deselect. Now if I turn this off, you can see I've got this black layer. So next, just like we did with the shapes, I'm just going to hit Command T or Control T on a PC to free transform, right click, warp. And this time we're just going to slightly offset the corner. I'm looking at this one right here. So we have that little bit of a difference with this warp. All right, that looks good. And now we're going to apply that Gaussian blur. So filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and then I'm going to actually reduce this to, let's see, let's do like 25 for this one. That looks good. So just a little bit larger than what we put on our shapes. And hit OK. We're going to reduce our opacity to 50% just like we did before, and change our blend mode to multiply. So that's looking really good. And now we need to add an additional drop shadow off of the pink layer. So we're going to double click on that, come over to drop shadow, and let's find a good size because we want it to look like this is sinking into the pink area instead of popping up. And that's actually feeling pretty good just right there. Let's see. Yeah, I like that. So I'm going to keep this. Let's see. Bring that down to 65%. Actually, I'm going to keep it at 75. Okay, so 75 for opacity, distance is 9, size is 35 for a drop shadow, and then hit OK. So the last thing that we need to do is add an outer glow around here so it's brighter up on top than it is down here. So it just adds to that feeling of depth going on. And in order to do that, if we just applied an outer glow to our pink or our black layer, then it would appear inside of the T, and we want it to be on this pink area right here. So nice little workaround for that is to take your T, hold Alt, click, and drag all the way up. We're going to change this to white. So let me put in white. And then we're going to change the blend mode to multiply so it'll disappear. And then we're going to double click, create a layer style of an outer glow, and I'm going to select this pink and just make it a lighter version of pink so it seems more natural instead of such a hard white, and hit OK. And now we're just going to increase the size, and we're going to reduce the opacity way down to like 20. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to hit OK. I've got a size of 111 pixels, opacity of 20, and then I just chose a lighter shade of this pink. and then hit OK, and there we go. We've got a pretty cool looking letter with paper cutout shapes that are layered within that letter. So once again, you can put this inside of logos, used for web graphics, for brand identity purposes, to create really interesting looks. It's a pretty flexible technique once you start really getting into it and playing around. So if you enjoyed this tutorial, please subscribe. I release a new design tutorial every single week. And don't forget to head on over to every-tuesday.com for even more design tutorials and a bunch of design freebies. And I will, just as a reminder, leave the links to the paper texture patterns that I used in this video. If you'd like to use the same ones or just check them out, I will leave a link in the video description for those. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next week.